Tonight, let's zoom in, though, on making the strongest application possible for your various foreign policy jobs that you might be seeking. So just a quick outline while we get going here. I'm going to talk about some underlying philosophy stuff that can structure your thinking about your job search. I'm going to talk about how to do a really good resume. I'm going to talk about cover letters, that how to improve your cover letters to make them really stand out, interviews, and then I'll talk a little bit about networking through the lens of using it to get your application package looked at. And I'm saying all of this stuff as someone who, of course, has interviewed and applied for jobs, but also as someone who has probably spent more time sitting on the other side of the table, interviewing people, reviewing applications, et cetera. So I'm going to try to make clear some of the things that folks who are doing the hiring are thinking about, because I think that'll be helpful to you. We'll close with Q&A. So to start, the philosophy around applying for jobs and around crafting the best application. One of the really basic things that's easy to lose is that you need to make a mindset shift from thinking about your goals and your interests and needs to putting yourselves in the shoe of the hiring authority, the person who is going to be selecting you. It's very easy to get lost in that, because when you're looking for a job, your priority is to get one, and it may in fact be very painful for you to be sitting there not having one. But for them, for the hiring authority, that's a different problem that they're confronting. They already have a job. Their focus is on finding the best person that they can, and this is a very difficult moment for them, or it can be, and a very risky moment, because if you hire badly, it has a million different ways of being bad. And you can end up, with an underperforming employee. You can end up having to separate somebody. I mean, you could end up in litigation. And so you really want to make sure that you're getting the kind of employee who's not going to yield those kinds of problems for you, that you're going to have somebody who's going to excel. But you don't have much information at the start of the process to do that. You typically just have a resume and a cover letter, which is very artificial. And then you have an interview, which, there's been a lot of research showing interviews are not all that great at predicting how you actually do in your job. So you're using these very imperfect tools, especially with someone who's new to you. You're only operating on glimpses of that individual and trying to draw things out that can help you resolve some of the risks and identify strengths. As you are trying to apply, also be mindful that this person is probably looking at a lot of applications. And so you want to figure out ways to stand out. And I'm going to talk about a few things that can do that. But two themes that you'll see across all of these things I'm going to speak about is customization, really making your application package unique to the particular role that you're applying for, and concreteness, really trying to transform the examples that you give, the ways you illustrate your skills, the ways you illustrate your temperament, your abilities, all through very concrete examples, things ideally that can be quantified, et cetera. So let's start out about the resume. So for the hiring manager, this is how you can pretty much assess who you want to interview. And in particular, it's about how you can assess what you want to talk about with the people that you do interview. So it's really about trying to get past that first screen. And one of the really common mistakes you'll see people make, particularly early in their career, but anybody can make it, is to use a very generic resume. I'm very guilty of this from my own early career search. It's also just easy to have a file sitting in your drive, just called, resume.docx. That's pretty unchanging, pretty stable, and really just recounts the basic facts about your career. A lot of people, as they produce that generic document, are thinking in terms of a limit. They are thinking, okay, I have to do a 1 or 2 page document at the end of this. And because of that, if you're trying to capture your experiences fairly generically in 1 to 2 pages, you're really going to miss out on a lot of the things that you've done over the course of your career. And as you drag on in your career and it more time passes from when you were actually doing those things, you might forget certain things that you accomplished, skills you may have used or been required to exhibit, that could actually be quite valuable for a particular case of an opportunity. Careers these days are not linear, and so you want to be prepared for that nonlinearity by capturing as much of as many of the ways that you can sell yourself as possible. I always tell folks within 18 months of being out of grad school, I was doing a job, being on the editorial staff of a magazine that I had never imagined myself doing, had never really thought about until some of the opportunities appeared before me. And so there were skills that I was developing over the years that were relevant to that I hadn't really been capturing, been thinking about. And so the real thing that you want to be doing here that'll both help you capture as much of that memory as possible and be ready to deliver a customized, highly compelling resume that's going to answer the questions that are in that hiring manager's mind, is to build a document that I'll call a master resume. And this is something that can be really of unlimited length. There's no maximum besides what your hard drive can hold. I could easily see something like this, even for somebody early career, being 3 or 4 pages, or even much more. And those of you who have done federal resumes, I think there's some degree of similarity across those two things. They can become quite long, quite easily. So the concept of the master resume is that you're getting something that captures everything. And then you're whittling it down and creating a unique document for every application that you send in by pulling out stuff that's irrelevant. And in order to bring out your experience in your past from a broader lens than just, for instance, writing down what your duties were, you want to be able to apply a couple of different lenses. One of the really obvious ones is what are called hard skills. The things like, I know how to code in Visual Basic or something like that. That I have a particular skill that you could give me a test on, you could measure it. It's easy to objectively say, whether someone is a certified accountant or not. And that is definitely something that you want to capture on your resume. And a lot of folks remember that. Similar to that is just tools that you've used at various parts of your career, whether it's a software package, a particular technology, just making sure that you record all of that. I mean, I can tell you, I've had a lot of different types of software that I've had to use over the course of my career, most of which I don't use day to day. And it would be really hard for me to bring that to mind if I'm not recording that over the course of my career to keep really detailed notes. But when people focus on hard skills and on really concrete accomplishments, they can miss out on something called soft skills. And for those of you who registered ahead of time, I dropped a link to you in the email that I sent, and I'm just going to grab it for everybody else right now. That's one of my favorite articles about soft skills. Conceptually, soft skills are just a quality or a skill that you have that cannot be measured. It's something that you can't easily take a test on, that you can't easily, prove that you have through some kind of like quantitative measure. So let me drop this link in here. This article is called 135 Soft Skills. These are often interpersonal skills that you might have. Things like leadership, having difficult conversations, working in a team setting, managing large teams, managing small teams, taking leadership of an informal group, or, being able to coordinate work well in those kinds of settings. And these are things that are actually extremely valuable, and in my mind would make the difference between a successful and an unsuccessful employee, and a highly desirable employee and a bad employee in a lot of different settings, even ones that are primarily based around hard skills. If you have somebody who is the best accountant in the world or the best mathematician in the world, but they have a lack of really any soft skills, it's going to make them significantly less effective. And I can tell you early in my own career, it was a weakness of mine. Just from in my character, in the things I had cultivated in my life, that I had a lot of basic policy knowledge that was very helpful to me, but that I could have been a lot more effective if I had also been really working that interpersonal angle. There's another element to soft skills, which is more individual skills, things like self-regulation, time management, things that you might group in psychology terms under executive function, your ability to juggle competing priorities, et cetera. And you might find, looking through all of your past experiences, especially if you look at a really extensive and thematic list like that 135 soft skills, you're going to find that a lot of those might be showing up all across your career. You might be able to identify themes that are like, oh, these are strengths I didn't realize that I had. And you might be able to find the things that are most ready to be tailored to a particular application based on trying to intuit or talk to other people to figure out what soft skills are most crucial in a particular role that you're applying for. And you might end up emphasizing something and using a lot of examples from something in your interviews that wasn't necessarily the most facially relevant set of experiences that you had, but that's actually most relevant to the underlying soft skills that you had. One other thing to be mindful of is in speaking about the tasks that you did, the duties that you had, et cetera, in the course of a particular role, to focus in on your accomplishments and to connect your role and the accomplishments you had in it to value created for whatever purpose it was that you were trying to fulfill. Being the team captain of a soccer team is very relevant. Being the team captain of a championship soccer team is even more potentially compelling, especially if you're able to explain how it is that you contributed to the mentality of that team as it moved toward its championship. Being able to speak in terms of those accomplishments is going to be much more compelling than simply asserting that you had a particular skill or just listing out the duties that you had, because both unsuccessful and successful employees have the same duties. Some formulas that you can use for really clarifying what your accomplishments are. One would be that you did activity X in order to achieve purpose Y, and that this led to Z results. And ideally that's something you can quantify. A 10% increase in sales and something like that is pretty clearly going to be connected to value for a company that you're working with. Or it might even be a negative accomplishment. I recently had something that I was thinking through a past experience of mine where I said, what, my main contribution there was preventing something harmful from happening for the organization I was with at the time. Another formula that you can use that's very similar is that I used such and such skill or quality in order to achieve such and such purpose, and that this produced these results. And that is more going to be a formula that you might use with a particular, say, a software package or some other really hard skill, but also something that might be a soft skill, that you used your leadership skills to, encourage teammates to increase their contribution in a particular way. And then once you've got this master resume, you've sat down and built out this big document with just looking through all these lenses at the various experiences you've had in your life. The way that you put this into practice is when you see a new role that you're applying for, you take a good look at that announcement. And if you've got any other kind of intelligence on what that role contains, you're going to save a copy of this file. And this is going to be the document that you work on in order to produce that custom resume that you send in. And you're just going to start carving out stuff that's not relevant to the announcement, and then amplifying and elevating stuff and maybe illustrating a bit more, making more prominent in the document the things that are most relevant to that announcement. And that, again, can include soft skills. And if you want to get into a bit in the Q&A, how you can figure out what sorts of soft skills might be relevant, that's another thing that we could talk about. So let's talk a little more about resumes here. So one of the things that you'll want to do is not be strictly focused on a chronological structure for this. You're going to have a significant amount of chronological order. I think that's going to be a much more orthodox way of doing a resume than some of these kind of things you'll hear about, like thematic resumes that, try to focus on, say, a particular skill and talk about experiences over time in which you use that. But a lot of folks will say, all right, for this role, my education or they'll just have a generic resume that just has, their most recent work experiences and then their education, or their education and their most recent work experiences. But you want to really have whichever of those is most relevant for that role up at the top. And then you want to really put a lot of emphasis on it. A lot of people who are fresh out of college, for example, will seriously understate the value that they created and got out of their college experience. One that I'm a bit biased on as a leader of an organization that for a lot of students is an extracurricular. A lot of people understate the value of their extracurriculars. These are cases where you might have some of the most responsibility and be able to exhibit a much broader set of skills than the really basic executive function skills and intellect that you need in order to get good grades. You can show a much broader picture of yourself by talking about your extracurriculars. And if you've got some really strong bullet points in there, that can really stand out to a hiring manager. Another thing that you can bring in is volunteering roles, particularly if you were able to tie that to a particular skill or experience that might be relevant. And then as you are building out, that kind of internal structure of your resume, you really want to figure out what things are the most relevant to that role and be able to put and give it as much space as it needs. You might have no bullet points under something that's less relevant. You might even cut it out and just say, further work experience available on request. I don't typically list, my time working at Wendy's in high school, not only because it was so long ago. It's not very relevant to a lot of the roles that I've had, but also I wasn't very good at it. And so, if I did put that in there and get some questions about it in an interview, I'd have a lot of bad examples to give because it's like, yeah, here's why I wasn't the best Wendy's employee, and I would have to be kind of playing defense in my questions. So if I was applying to, say, an editorial role, I worked in the editing process of a magazine like 7 or so years ago at this point, but I'm going to put a whole lot of emphasis on that and maybe only have a couple of bullet points about my current experience, just because that's going to be most relevant to that current application. Again, some of this stuff will seem a little basic, but it's very easy to lose track of it because applying can be kind of a grind. Another interlocking set of questions that I've got here is, who is the application going to? Who is going to be reviewing it? At smaller organizations, that's typically going to be the hiring manager, the person who is actually going to be making the decision about whether you get the job, bringing you onto their personal team, or it might not even be a team. And so you're going to be able to cater to that audience, which is typically going to have a much higher level understanding of what's important in a particular role, a better ability to understand some of your more specific examples, things like that. Whereas if it's a human resources department that's evaluating, especially at a large, fairly diverse sort of organization that has a lot of different kinds of jobs being done in it, they might end up being a lot more reliant on that job description or on a very basic conversation that they had, maybe even a couple of weeks ago with the person who's the hiring manager, or they might have, some sort of even more formalized process. And with that person, you're going to want to keep in mind that they might not immediately be making connections between things that seem obvious to you. For example, that if you're talking about that you spent time living in Tajikistan doing study abroad, that if you're applying for a role related to Iran, that's actually language development skill. And that if you're applying to a role related to Russia, that's a very Russian influenced country where a lot of the elites speak Russian. And so you would need to spell that out. You need to say studied Persian language in Tajikistan, used Russian language on a daily basis, interacted with people influenced by the Russian cultural sphere, whatever it is, that you can really lay that out. And you might also be looking at that job announcement and trying to make careful use of the keywords that you're seeing, really connecting the words that you're seeing in that announcement to the skills that you are trying to demonstrate and to the experiences that you had. And this is closely relevant to another issue that folks will encounter in some application processes, which is whether the initial evaluation and intake of your resume is being done by a robot or by a human. And this is typically the human side is going to come in again, typically at smaller organizations that might not be using something called an ATS, an applicant tracking system. And, this is basically a computerized database that pulls in applications and then stores them for you to review, typically as an HR person, when you want to look through them. And in those, one, you don't want to use a really fancy format because the computer has to read it and it has to be able to parse that data and put it in order. So like if I was applying to something where I thought, there might be an ATS here, I'm not going to have like a weird sidebar or something. I'm just going to list that stuff at the bottom or at the top. Because you'll sometimes see resume templates that have things like that I'm not convinced are automatically going to be pulled in by an ATS. Similarly, if something's in an ATS, it might also be more keyword based. And so again, you're going to be wanting to emphasize those keywords that are kind of the top level descriptions, not only tied to the current job that you're applying for, but if it's a large organization, tied to jobs that might be similar to it or that you might have relevant skills for. Because if they're going to go pull their resume bank, you want to be showing up prominently in that search. Conversely, with a human reviewer, you can be a lot more free flowing. But honestly, I think building every resume as though it's going for ATS is probably not a bad idea. And then another very closely related question here is whether you're posting a federal resume or a normal resume. And as far as federal resumes go, they're not my primary area of expertise. They're much more extensive. They're much more structured. They're a lot longer. We have a video called How to Get Hired by the Department of Defense on our YouTube channel that I would highly recommend you check out because it's us talking with a guy who actually does hiring for them and knows what to look for in a federal resume and the mistakes people make that are particular to that format. But I would just say a lot of the same things are going to be relevant. Keywords, for example, are very crucial in federal hiring processes. Two other little details that I think people can often miss out on. One is your file name for the resume, and this applies to your cover letter and other documents too. A lot of folks will send in resumes that just say, resume.doc or whatever it is. And that's not terribly helpful if you are getting a big pile of like 50 resumes. And it's an example of having a kind of a you-centered approach to your job search versus a hiring manager-centered approach to your job search. Because for the hiring manager, they're going to want to be able to find you in that big pile of resumes. They might be interviewing 6 people that day, and want to make sure, while they're on their coffee break between interviews number 4, which is the person before you, and interview number 5, which is you, that they've got the right resume. They might be looking it over right then for a refresher. If they're working with a human resources person, it might even be the first time they're looking at that resume. And so you want it to be easy for them to find. So put it, either first name, last name, first name, and then, resume. And you might even list the role. John Gay, program analyst, resume for, XYZ Corporation. That kind of thing is going to be very helpful for them in pulling out your particular resume. Another thing that folks might not be mindful to include who are working in the foreign policy field is that you really have an opportunity here on your resume to capture that you have overseas experience if you do. That this can be almost like an independent line if it's not something that was done, say, as part of a job. And it can bring up a lot of great examples, particularly on soft skills, resilience, operating in multicultural contexts, operating across various kinds of barriers and complexities. I mean, everybody knows how being abroad is. It presents all sorts of unique challenges, but because of that, it can be a great source of things to talk about in interviews and in cover letters. But it's also something that you might want to capture on your resume. It can be a big source of credibility when speaking about your application. If you're working on something. If you're trying to work somewhere, we're going to be dealing with a particular region. Even if you live someplace when you were pretty young, that's still going to, raise my baseline assumption as a hiring manager of what your familiarity is with the culture, the language, et cetera. Next up, your cover letter. So for the hiring manager, the purpose of the cover letter is to, again, help you figure out who to interview and what to talk about in that interview, the kinds of things you might want to drill down on. But it's also a way to gauge a person's enthusiasm. If you work at an organization with a particular point of view, you might gauge whether that person really cares about the mission or values that organization stands for, or whether they're just trying to get a job that will maybe help them land on their feet in Washington, but they're not necessarily excited about this role. And you can also sometimes ascertain ability to contribute. Like as you get a little more experienced, and especially if you're more familiar with an organization that you're applying for and with the project that you're applying to work on, you might be able to offer directions that you would like to go in that role. Things that you would like to see change, things you would like to see expand, ideas that you have that you think could be helpful. Especially the more your responsibility goes up in those kinds of roles, the more you're moving into leadership, the more that's going to be key to what makes you a strong applicant. I wouldn't, overstate that. If you're writing a cover letter for the CIA, you don't necessarily want to talk about I know how to pick locks or whatever, because they're going to train you on that, and you don't know what the heck you're going to be doing anyway because it's secret. But for a cover letter, one of the things that can really make it effective, I learned this tip recently, and it really just blew my mind because it's so basic, is to really sit there with a blank piece of paper and write like you were telling a friend the things you would say to a friend if you wanted to tell them why you're excited about this job and why you'd be perfect for it. Because a lot of people will have kind of a formulaic cover letter that they might tinker with a bit, but that's generally going to be pretty similar. And that's just not a way to show some of those things that the hiring manager is looking for, especially enthusiasm and interest in the organization's mission and in the unique role that you'd be playing there. And I can tell you like how much that enthusiasm matters. When I was at the going away party at the end of my time at the Center for the National Interest, I revealed what had been a dark secret of mine, which is that at the end of the cover letter that I sent in, which was a generic cover letter, I had forgotten to swap out the name of another organization, saying I was really excited to work at, some other organization, that nobody noticed it. But it was because the first half of my cover letter was talking about how excited I was, how genuinely excited I was by the prospect of working for an organization that, right on the homepage of its website at the time said America's Realist Voice. And I was like, well, hey, I'm a foreign policy realist. I'm really pumped about this. These are all the things that excite me about working for such an organization. And that's immediately going to stick out. Like you might think that sounds really basic, but that is already going to put you ahead of, in my mind, at least half of the resumes and cover letters that you're going to be seeing if you're just doing some basic tailoring and really conveying that you have enthusiasm for that particular organization and its mission. Once you've got that kind of basic gushing about the job written out, you can restructure it a bit. And there's folks out there, websites you can go to that'll talk about, some sample cover letter structures you can use. But the real key here is to have a really strong opening paragraph, to really send in a few sentences a message of, again, enthusiasm, ability to contribute, skills relevant to the role, some of those really basic things that you want to inspire that person to keep reading. Because for a hiring manager, again, you might be getting big piles of these. And so after a while, you might realize very quickly, a lot of cover letters, you don't need to read the whole thing in order to know if it's worth reading further or not worth reading at all. It can become very quickly obvious, especially if you've done it a lot. And so you really need to grab people with that opening. And then again, be keeping your and their goals in mind as you're talking about why you want the role. And I would really lead with their goals. Why it is that you fit for the role. And conveying that enthusiasm, maybe in your paragraph 3 or so, you get something in that opening paragraph that gives a taste of how excited you are. And makes it concrete in a way that's not, not everybody's going to say, I'm really excited to work at CSIS because I want to work with these 3 scholars who I've been following for years. Like that'll stand out compared to I'm really excited to work at CSIS. So if you really just convey that enthusiasm at the beginning, you can go into it deeper later, but you're really going to be trying to emphasize the things that you can do that can solve the hiring manager's problem, which is finding someone who can do a good job in that role. Again, file name, you're going to want to say, name, cover letter, possibly add in the role or a date too. Let's grab the next slide here. So on interviewing, if you're the hiring manager, again, you've been using some of these previous things to identify who you want to interview and also what you want to talk about in that interview. You're looking at things saying, I want to ask some questions about that because I'm trying to answer these particular questions that I might have or identify skills that I think are relevant for the role. So you're also trying to reduce your uncertainties. You're trying to say, okay, I don't really know this person necessarily. I want to get a better picture of how good they're going to be in the role. You want to assess their relevant skills. So maybe get a concrete example of something that they're claiming on their resume or fishing to see if they've got something in their past that they might not have listed that's relevant to the unique and particular role that you're going to have them working on. It's also an opportunity, of course, to assess basic professionalism and the kind of temperament that you have, whether, you're maybe someone who's better suited to, working in a setting where there's, a dynamic team environment where really strong social skills are critical, maybe some sort of external facing role, or whether it's something, say a research role where a lot of it is just going to come down to your research chops. And of course, you want to see how the person lines up with the kind of billboard that they gave you in the form of their resume and their cover letter. And so because of that, you might ask probing questions about some of their past experiences in order to get a sense of hey, did they use this tool once or did they use it every day? That sort of thing. There's a couple different kinds of questions that folks tend to ask in interviews. There's some that you might call your kind of standard questions that you should just be prepared for. It's almost part of that assessing basic professionalism, knowing that they're going to ask you, tell me about yourself. They're probably going to ask you about some kind of challenge that you faced, about giving maybe a bit of a narrative on your time at a particular role. Like some of the things that everybody kind of expects. Same thing as asking if you've got any questions for me at the end of it. Asking good questions about that is a good sign. Asking no questions at all is not a sign of enthusiasm on the part of the applicant, and is going to be a bit of a red flag. Then you're going to have situational questions, which by their nature are hypothetical. It's going to be like, hey, you had an angry customer talking about this. How do you resolve it? Folks will use these. What I like a lot better, and what are harder to answer, are behavioral questions, which require working on concrete examples. You're really trying to elicit for a particular skill or quality that a person has, a particular time, an occasion on which they used it, and how it mattered. And the formula that you want to use in your answer is called SBO: situation, behavior, outcome. You're laying out, here's what was going on when I had to, here's the context in which I had to have a difficult conversation with someone I was supervising. Here's what I did in that context. Here's how I approached it and what I said. And then here's how it went and the results that we got. And this is something that you can set up in your resume and your cover letter and in your interview prep. I mean, one, obviously be jogging your memory, maybe even have kind of a short list of things that you really want to talk about in that SBO format in the course of an interview. But you can also, through things that you emphasize in your resume and your cover letter, try to induce people to ask about them so that you can talk even more about good SBOs that you have. And I remember an interview I was doing years ago where I did a very basic behavioral question, which is about a time I had a difficulty with a colleague. And, I hadn't actually had a lot of difficulties with my colleagues at the time. And the one that I could think of was an example where I had to go over somebody's head in order to resolve an issue. And that was very salient for me as an employee because it was such a hard decision for me to do that. And so it was very available to my mind because I hadn't really reflected on that question beforehand. That's actually a pretty bad example to give in the context of that, because they're looking for someone who can resolve their interpersonal conflicts in the workplace well. And I was giving an example that created the impression that I was bad at it. And then one other category of questions that you might have is what you might call familiarity or perspective questions. And this is something that's, I would say, is a little more unique to the foreign policy field. I would often, when I was interviewing people at the national interest, I would ask them about their thoughts on the negotiations deal with Iran, because it was something that I knew a whole lot about. It's something that anybody is going to be expected to know a basic knowledge about, because we were doing generalist foreign policy stuff, and so somebody needs to know about that. And I can use it to assess kind of the quality of their thought, their ability to express themselves, how closely they follow these international issues that they're going to be working on day to day, et cetera. You can, of course, use these to assess a skill too. The other is what I might call perspective questions. And this is going to be in organizations that have a bit more of a vision of what they're aiming for. Maybe it's a particular political faction or something. And these might be asking about your views about a particular issue or something like that. And I think for most people, that's going to be pretty easy to give your opinion on something because everybody's got an opinion. But, it's just another type of question that you might encounter. And as a hiring manager, you're trying to assess like, hey, is this someone who's going to be jazzed about our mission or someone who just wants to have a job, and we have a job. Now, I'm just going to real quickly talk about networking. For your hiring manager, hiring someone that can actually resolve some of the questions that you might have above, or it can make them easier to resolve, because it means that instead of basing your knowledge of someone of, tops, resume, cover letter, and maybe a couple of panel interviews, you've got that, plus you've got your knowledge through peers or through direct contact of how that person is in the field. And so it's reducing that uncertainty. It's reducing that risk. It can also enable organizations to do things, hiring through networks, like making hires quietly, poaching talent that they may have identified at another organization, working with somebody that they trust in order to find talent for a role, or even creating a role for somebody where you encounter somebody that's really talented out there that you say, you know what, I need to have this person in my organization, and I need to figure out how to bring them on, or oh man, like they're interested in working on this issue that I've been trying to resolve, and they've got the skill set and the vision to pull it off. So that's why part of why networking is so important is that there are roles out there that are not going to be known to the general public. There are roles out there that might not exist because someday a role might be created for you because someone's impressed with you. So really having those connections is going to be extremely valuable. And of course, it can also help you make a better application because you can make sure to understand through contacts that you might have, not only the goals of the hire, but maybe the situation leading up to it. Why is it that this role is open? What were problems that they've had in this role before? What are successes that they've had? Like whose shoes am I filling? What made them good or bad at their job? And it can also give you insight on the process because you might have an insider who's going to give you better understanding of like, okay, if it's been 2 weeks with this particular organization, that means the process is over. Versus, oh yeah, so and so got crushed on a big project, and they're not really able to review resumes right now, but that doesn't mean you've been forgotten. You can also use that network to find things to not apply for, because sometimes job announcements might be posted where they've already got a candidate in mind, where they're trying to kind of ratify a quiet hire, or seek other resumes just to make sure that the person that they're hiring is the right fit. And so that's not really a great place to be throwing in your resume. And I mean, I'll tell you, like a lot of the stuff on USA Jobs, that's what it is. It might even be the person getting hired, a contractor who's trying to get hired as a government employee, who has been tasked with writing the job description for that government employee role. And also, of course, having those inside connections can help you stand out in big crowds. Now, the key here with how you use your network in this context is just to activate it. To be occasionally checking in with people that at organizations that you want to work with, just to maintain those relationships. But also, if you're in the hunt, to let them know. But also by staying top of mind for them, so that if they have a role that pops open, they might reach out to you and tell you about it. And conversely, of course, you can reach out to a person that if you've put in an application, because that can be very helpful. So again, we talked about resumes, cover letters, interviews, and networking. The key mindset shift that I want folks to make is really focusing on the needs of the hiring authority, which we've talked about, on using a lot of customization in your resumes, and on getting concrete in your examples, particularly for behavioral interviewing, but in bullet points, in cover letters, et cetera. All of it, getting really specific and connecting to value can be very helpful. One other quick closing before we get to Q&A is what I'll call economic considerations. You've got, you don't have unlimited time. You don't have unlimited energy. It can be very draining to apply for jobs. And so you want to be thinking about how to best use that time. Something that I think is always useful to keep in mind is what's called the Pareto principle, or the 80-20 rule, which is basically that in a lot of situations, 80% of the variation in something comes from 20% of the input. So for instance, I once heard a cop talking about this, and he said, 80% of the problems come from 20% of the people. I'm having a lot of repeated interactions with the same people who are doing lots of crime, as opposed to just random interactions with citizens, many of whom are not regularly engaged in crime. And so for this, you want to be putting in, 80% of your effort in the 20% of roles that you're most interested in, that you feel you're most competitive for. Because I just talked a lot about customization, and these are the things those are the roles where you really want to be pulling out all the stops and investing a lot of extra time in prepping that, as opposed to spreading things much more evenly. And then, some of the things that you can do for that bottom 80% of roles that you're a bit less certain about, especially the ones that are maybe near misses, is building a couple of documents off of your master resume that are thematic or generic for a category of roles that you tend to be applying for a lot. So like, think tank research assistantships. It's not too hard to talk about basic research skills that you've exhibited in the past and to highlight those in a resume. And then you can just tailor the cover letter on that particular occasion. Another thing that you'll want to be doing to really help structure a job search, especially if it's been going on a while, is compartmentalizing and routinizing it. Really sitting there and saying, all right, I'm going to build in, X block of time every week, every day, whatever it is that I'm going to be doing my job search. And I'm not going to be doing it, 24/7 or feeling guilty about it, every time that I'm not working on it. It's kind of like how a lot of folks really enjoy not being in college because, in many roles you can kind of put down your computer at the end of the day and be done. Whereas, if you're a college student, you kind of always have something that you're supposed to be studying. And that's actually a really stressful way to live. And so if you really start blocking off time and then building it into your schedule, I think you're going to make things a lot easier for yourself. So let's get to that Q&A right now. Let me pull up and see what's been getting the upvotes here. So we got a question from Will. What's the biggest red flag that you can try to avoid when it comes to crafting a feasible career in foreign policy as a young person? There's a couple of different directions that we could go with this, and I might even open up the participant tab. And if you want to, I'll hit a button here that if you want to cut in and start talking about what it is exactly that you're thinking about. I've just sent you that offer right now. Like you should be able to unmute yourself if you want. But otherwise I can sit here and pontificate on this. So, some different red flags on a resume. I kind of gave an example of one of the things that I did, where I had a behavioral example that was really salient for me because it was a bad thing that I had to, where I'd had to escalate a situation a bit in order to resolve it. And that by not prepping, the kind of availability heuristic of like, hey, I'm going to use the examples that are most relevant to my mind that just come to mind first. Cause I'm sitting there, any behavioral interview, you're on the spot. And I gave a really bad example that was showing kind of the opposite of what they wanted me to show. So really, thinking through again, that hiring manager and what it is that that they're trying to solve by answering that question. Another kind of set of red flags you might encounter. Again, I would say on a resume, genericness, non-alignment with the set of skills and goals in a role. You might sometimes, if you're working in an organization that has a particular set of ideas, you might see stuff on there that might be a bit off-putting or raise questions. If it's like, hey, I want to work for the NRA and I used to work for Moms Demand Action for gun control or whatever, that's going to be something that's going to jump out at them and that you'd really have to, be ready to explain and I think affirmatively explain or even leave off your resume. Those are some really basic things, but again, feel free to cut in if you'd like. And I'm going to keep plowing down the list here. So another question that we've gotten from Jennifer is about foreign languages that you used previously for work, but have since forgotten. This is a big dilemma for me. Anybody who's done a career call with me and talked about languages knows that I could go on and on for this because I've forgotten a lot of languages and I kind of regret it. In my mind, now granted, I've never hired somebody for language competence before, to my recollection. But in my mind, if I was, for instance, in a government role, I might sit there and say, okay, like this person is starting on third base for learning German if they've already taken 2 years of German. They're remembering as much as they're learning. And then another thing that is out there is a lot of places like state where they might hire people who need to speak a bunch of different languages, and they might be hiring people to do consular work in some place where like very few people in America speak the language, or it's just really hard to find folks that already know it. Just showing that you have the ability to learn languages is very helpful. And I think there's ways to talk about that on a resume. You can describe a skill as dormant or something like that. That this is something that you haven't used in a long time, but could readily recover. It's obviously not going to be as strong as having something that you already used and that you stayed fresh on. But it's still going to be better than nothing. And I would also note, like, staying current on languages is something I'm very passionate about telling people to do, because you put in so much work on it, and it can be very easy to keep a basic level of competency through things like, say, listening to a daily news podcast. That can really help you to stay at least not atrophying as fast as you might otherwise be. So another question we've got here is a PhD to industry or government resume, and whether you might want to do a hybrid style document instead of a CV or resume. I would say a CV is probably the wrong direction for most stuff. A government case, that might be a little different, because federal resumes are so unique and they don't really have those same length constraints. And, if you've looked at a lot of academic CVs, they don't have a lot of length constraints either. I think the optimal academic CV is super long, because it's full of all the publications you've done and all the public engagement and all that. But I think I would be looking for ways to distill that down, and also to cross-sell your skills. Because to me, a lot of roles where you're selling the fact that you have a PhD is you're selling you have research skills, and often you might know research methods. You might know how to work with polling data and how to conduct a poll that's going to be valid. You might have great statistical knowledge and know how to work with like 3 different software packages or data visualization. You might know data science, et cetera. And really pulling out those skills, talking about how you use them, and then looking also just at your broader PhD experience through the lens of soft skills. So for example, within the world of PhDs, some like European style PhDs or some of the more executive PhDs are not as competitive for American academic jobs, not merely because of the research skills that you might have missed compared to an American academic PhD, but also because American academic PhDs, you tend to do a lot of teaching in the process of it. And so if you're going for a university that really values teaching, if you've done an academic PhD, you're going to have a lot of examples of that. And that's something where you're going to maybe be able to pull that out with some soft skills and examples of accomplishments that come from the undergrad IR 101 that you taught or something like that, rather than the coolest and fanciest, most impressive stuff that you did in the course of your research. That would be my real mindset. Like I would also just be thinking, hey, most normal people don't know, the ins and outs of getting a PhD. They don't necessarily know what goes into it and the underlying skills that it entails. They might know, like, okay, this person's really smart, but a lot of people, their dissertation topic is something super narrow, maybe even kind of weird, where it's going to be better for you to be able to explain that. Like I was just sitting there the other day thinking about an idea that, like, hey, someone who's a grad student in Iranian studies could really do a heck of a dissertation on this particular topic. And it would set, if I were to tell you the kind of theme, you would think, wow, this sounds totally irrelevant to anything that could have practical value outside of the humanities. But actually, it would require a lot of political knowledge, historical knowledge, social knowledge, cultural knowledge in order to explain it, in order to explain why it's significant. And so if you were talking about something like that, you'd lean on that and not on the title of your dissertation. Those are just some mindset shifts that I would have. Now, granted, if you're being hired by somebody else who's a PhD, they might better be able to appreciate the traditional stuff. But once again, as I mentioned earlier, you might be facing a screen from an HR person, and you're going to want to be a lot more explanatory of what it is that having a PhD and getting a PhD entails. So we got another question from Jorge about people moving into the foreign policy and federal sphere out of the military. I've heard a lot of mixed things about some of the transition resources that are available to people at the end of their military careers. I would definitely encourage you to take advantage of those, but again, I've heard mixed reviews. So I would really zero in on those soft skills. On looking through a really extensive list of soft skills and looking at the different tasks you had to do in the military and discussing them in those terms. Being able to say like, in this particular role, I was leading a small team, and getting say a group of people who are at various levels of proficiency and aptitude to be certified competent in this particular military skill. And that's probably going to be a pretty rich vein of how you might be motivating people, how you might be identifying the particular needs of the folks working under you. I would also say, like, especially for folks on the officer track, some folks in that role move into positions of very high responsibility very early. The number of people that you have working for you as an infantry captain is going to be a heck of a lot higher than most people who aren't like CEOs who are around the same age. And so really being able to highlight that, like, hey, I've led large groups of people doing very difficult tasks. I would also encourage doing some digging on some of the cultural differences between military and civilian work cultures, because this is a classic culture clash that can happen even in involving people who are actively serving and maybe people who are civilians who might be even reservists or who are just regular civilians or who may be retired. That there can be differences in expectation of how much explanation you're going to get around a decision, how you are expected to react to something that you think is a bad idea that maybe someone over you is talking about. What sorts of language are appropriate in the workplace? All of those are things that might vary between different workplaces, but also particularly between the military and the civilian spheres. And then with regards to federal agencies in particular, I mean, figure out ways to find stuff where the veterans preference will count in your favor. That would be the number one thing. And there's programs like the Presidential Management Fellowship that will often have elements of that. Like that can be a real way to concretely take advantage of that skill. And then recognizing that, hey, you might not need to do all this unpacking for someone working in there who's coming from a similar background. We've got a question from Scott about, I read something that discouraged applying for jobs on the weekend because the hiring folks don't read resumes on Mondays, so your application ends up at the bottom of the pile. Do you find this to be true? So are there good days to submit the application? I don't know. I'm a little hesitant around the kind of like, one magic trick that'll help you really stick out around, some of the really basic technique like that. Like, I think it's probably, it wouldn't blow my mind if like applying at 9 p.m. on Saturday is not the ideal way to get a job, on the grounds that, like, for instance, with some of our application systems that we work with, we get an email whenever an application comes in. And so when I come in on Monday, my inbox, that's going to be pretty far down. Something that's, Saturday evening is going to be well below all the stuff that came in a little earlier. And if I'm going to start from the top of my inbox, you're applicant number 10, you might get buried by some pressing thing, et cetera. So I could see that. But that's based kind of on my routine. If it's something that comes in through an applicant tracking system, you might open it up and you've got 10 people on a list. And that might be a little bit different for you. Other than that, it's probably going to vary a lot by the organization. And if you had access to an insider who could answer a question of like, hey, how busy is your organization on Thursday afternoons? There are probably better questions that you could ask that person to understand the specific role that you're applying for. That's my thought right there. Let's see. So we've got another question from Tessa. if you have career experience that's aligned with the political party, so say, for instance, you work for a Democratic member on the Hill and are applying to a bipartisan or nonpartisan organization, how would you go about framing your background, or is that not an issue? I think it's really going to vary. I think number one, there are a lot of places in Washington that place very high value on political experience and political connection and understanding, how a member of Congress thinks. Like there's an organization that I'm always encouraging people to check out who want to work in kind of the state and foreign policy field, who might have, say, campaign experience. U.S. Global Leadership Coalition, not the best name for an organization, but they basically work on promoting a strong State Department and a strong development budget, and they really love to hire people with political experience. And you look in there and it'll be like, yes, like we want people who have worked on campaigns, we want people who have worked on the Hill, and if they have particular types of members they want to reach out to, they might be saying like, oh yeah, I want someone who understands Republicans, or I want someone who understands Democrats, et cetera. So like sometimes that can be a huge asset. There will certainly be organizations that are not officially political, but that work around politics and that have an unofficial affiliation. So, like communications firms and things like that. There will be a lot that are like, yeah, this is all a bunch of Republicans there, or all a bunch of Democrats. With an organization that describes itself as bipartisan, if it's really bipartisan, then having been part of a party ought to be an asset, because that's one part. You're one of the buy that they're trying to have in their organization. Similarly, with nonpartisan, that can mean a whole lot of different things. Because with some folks, nonpartisan can just mean like, hey, we don't engage in political activity for the purposes of, the Federal Election Commission and the IRS. Like we're not going out there telling people to vote for candidate X, or to call their legislator to support particular measure Y. That's not something they do, but they might be very closely aligned with a particular political current. Like Heritage and AEI. Everybody knows those are conservative organizations, but they are officially not partisan organizations, because that's not like their part in the kind of legal intellectual ecosystem that's out there. So for those organizations, talking about that political work again might be an asset. The kind of polar opposite of that is going to be organizations that are maybe have a strong mandate to be independent. So if you're like, hey, all of my roles are like as campaign managers for particular parties' candidates, and now I want to go work as like a say an inspector general employee. Like, yeah, that might be a little bit more of a flag, I would imagine, because you're going to be expected to step back from those kinds of biases or beliefs that you bring, and apply a set of rules impartially. And so I would think about that, which kind of pull a particular organization might be leaning toward. Because there might also be organizations that are very mission-based that tend to have stronger constituencies on one side of the aisle or another. Like arms control is not officially a partisan issue, but its most enthusiastic champions tend to be Democrats. So like working with a Democrat is not typically going to be a red flag for an arms control organization. I've got a question from Maverick. You have advice for someone who is who's a history major with an IR and FP minor. Sometimes feel like I've set myself back in terms of opportunities in foreign policy by picking that major. That there's more to it, but you don't want that to outweigh other qualities that you might have on a resume. Well, one, as I was saying earlier, if you're only going to be listing that educational experience and what you majored in and minored in at the top of your resume if you think that's the thing that's most relevant out of all the stuff that you've done for the particular role that you're applying for. Otherwise, it might be, that for some roles, it's like, hey, you've got to have a BA in one of three relevant fields. Like a government role, it might be in the job description like that. It might also be something like, you want to know that someone has a particular set of expertise. And if someone studied, say, the history of a particular country, they might know more than someone who is approaching that country from a political science lens, especially because someone, in the political science discipline is often going to be focused on looking at things across particular cases. And so you might actually be bringing a lot more depth on a particular country. And so I think that there's ways to sell it. Like, I think with a lot of stuff, it's about how you sell it. And again, like, I would be stepping back and saying, is whether my degree is in history or political science or international relations or foreign policy or whatever, is that the thing that's most relevant, or is it like the qualities that people are assuming that I have based on the fact that I have a degree, and or on prior experiences that I have, and really talking in those terms and zooming out to look at your resume again through the lens of things like soft skills. I think that's going to be a much more fruitful vein. Because the other thing is, like, if you were to actually talk about the study of these issues, history and political science are just methodologies. They're different approaches to potentially the same set of problems. And you will see people who are political scientists who do stuff that looks like history, and people who are historians that do stuff that looks a lot like political science. And that's because, these are just tools for understanding an underlying phenomenon. So we got another question from a mysterious anonymous attendee. What if you have gaps in your resume? What kind of a red flag might that be? What about non-chronological resumes organized by industry, job type, or kind of experience? I mean, you can certainly do those non-chronological resumes. My big question on those would be, again, particularly with applicant tracking systems, is the computer going to play nice with that? Is it going to be able to pick up the real past experiences that you might have that are relevant to the role, or are they going to get lost in the noise because you listed things in a strange way? Now, if it's a really big gap, you probably do want to be able to explain that. Like if I was, re-entering the workforce after taking several years off, or I was moving from a totally different industry, I might think about going a little more thematic, or kind of going thematic de facto through the examples that I select in describing my past experiences. But in general, I think it's going to vary on the kind of economy. Like if you have a gap in your resume in 2020 and you had been working as like a waiter, that's not really going to necessarily reflect on whether or not you were a good waiter. It would reflect on the fact that there's a pandemic. And I think also people are going to be a little more understanding about that period in particular, the kind of peak pandemic era, because it was so profoundly disruptive of the economy, of a lot of industries, et cetera. And I would also think about ways to talk about that gap, particularly like if you're in a gap right now, think about whether there might be skills you can be developing, maybe a certification you might be pursuing, some language skills you might work on. You might really focus on, following an issue set really closely. You might do writing on an issue. Like, there are ways to improve your position as a job candidate that do not require work. I mean, if there's one thing I would want folks to take away from this, it's like, hey, whatever's most relevant in your background is the thing you want to really highlight the most for a particular role, even if that was a while ago, even if it was, part of your education, even if it wasn't a formal job, because you're trying to illustrate that you're a good fit for that role. So I think, if you're able to talk well about that gap on your resume and maybe show some forward progress that you made on something during that period, I think that's the best you can do in that context. And then we've got one last question. Whether I do one-on-one resume and cover letter help, I could definitely see if I have time for that. I will. For those of you who got an email from me before the session, I sent around a link to book time with me to talk. Feel free to reach out on that, and I can take a look at something, because I know it can be really hard to convey some of those non-traditional experiences. I mean, again, I would say first pass, look at the soft skills. And thank you all for attending. That is all the time we had. But like I said, feel free to reach out if you've got further questions. One of the things that the society exists to do is help people who share our mission, share our vision, succeed professionally, and reach positions where they can make impact for the kinds of ideas of realism and restraint that we stand for. And so it is central to our mission to be doing stuff like this, to be helping people who share that vision. So don't ever feel bad about reaching out. If you're reaching out to me personally, don't ever feel bad about pestering me a bit, because I have a lot of stuff in my inbox. And maybe executive function isn't one of the skills I should list at the top of my resume. But thank you all, and have a wonderful evening.